Hey, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Optimized Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Rod Wilson, and today we're covering everything ADU. My guest, Steph Gutierrez, is actually an expert at ADUs. She's focused primarily in Southern California, but obviously this applies. A lot of these strategies do apply across the country. She has a podcast called All Things ADU, and we just get into some of the newer regulations and just how that is impacting, investment development. Let's jump into it and enjoy this podcast with Steph Gutierrez. How you doing, Stephanie?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
And I said Stephanie, even though I just asked you and you prefer Steph. So we'll go with Steph from now on.
That sounds good too. Whatever's easier for you.
I really appreciate you taking the time. And as I was mentioning before we started recording, that this is a topic that I'm actually not that knowledgeable about as far as like regulations and, various aspects of ADU development. But I have a ton of clients that are doing ADUs, especially in Southern California. So anyway, I'm excited to kind of unpack some of this and maybe share some info that people could use. Why don't we start with just like a quick kind of background and how you got into this?
Yeah. My name's Stephanie. Thank you for the introduction. I am a realtor. I'm an ADU consulting. I'm a mother. I also enjoy surfing. I enjoy running. Recently got into running, so I've taken that on along with all these other hats. I've been in the real estate space for over 10 years, and I started off as a buyer's agent, right? Which is a very common way that a lot of agents start their real estate career. And working with so many buyers and investors, a lot of them, this was back in like 2017 when I got licensed, because prior to that, I was an assistant to other agents and building out teams and doing property management. So a lot of these buyers were asking me questions about how they can convert existing space, right? This was around 2017, 2018. And I found myself not knowing anything about the ADU development process. And ADUs were starting to become a thing in 2017 when legislation made it a lot more feasible for people to build. So started focusing on that. And I decided that that was the niche that I wanted to, just kind of follow because of the demand. As you guys know, Southern California, we are in a housing shortage, really nationwide, but even more so in high dense areas like SoCal. So we're in a housing shortage. We definitely have an affordability issue. So a lot of these buyers that I was showing properties to, whether they were an investor or a first-time home buyer, they couldn't afford the average monthly payment back then. So especially not now. And so The way that you have to look at the market is look at how you can maximize highest and best use of that property before you even buy it, right? So that you can figure out how you're going to help, how that rental income of that additional dwelling unit or accessory dwelling unit is going to help you offset your expenses, like your mortgage payment or other expenses. And that's just one strategy, right? Then I'll leave it at that. That's kind of how I started my ADU journey. And then from there started doing full-on consulting for people. By
the way, you could find Stephanie at Steph Sells ADU.
Right.
It has the 100,000 cards in there. So I wanted to make sure I had the right URL, but StephSellsADU.com. And she does coaching as well as provides a ton of info. So check that out. Okay, so let's kind of dive in. And by the way, for people are listening, throughout the country, I think this is primarily focused in Southern California, but as far as like regulations and some of the stuff that's going on related to ADUs, but the overall strategies and I think method applies. And it's not, I mentioned that I have a lot of clients doing ADUs. I mean, that is across the country and kind of taking advantage of, whether it's rent or just, kind of appealing to, the broader market with another unit in whatever they're, developing. So I guess let's go with, you want to start with maybe some of the, recent or new legislation. This is kind of what piqued my interest when I got your email is what new legislation that, investors and developers should be aware of.
Yeah. And I think I'll kind of just share with people a little bit of the basics before I give you guys like the new updated legislation so you guys can
Great idea.
understand, right? So they can understand kind of
Yeah.
like the workflow of these legislations and how every single year or every 2 years, they're making it a lot more feasible and easier, right, for you to build. So if you take a look at like the history of legislation, I talked about earlier how I tapped into the ADU space because in 2017, legislation allowed for homeowners to build an ADU, and this was a statewide ordinance, right, which overrides local ordinances. So that was a big deal. But then there was a couple of things that we had to work through. So in 2020, there was a lot more legislation. We went from being able to build one to being able to build two, to removing a couple other red tapes like, owner occupancy, except for junior ADUs and a couple other things. And then this last year in 2023, there was a couple legislations that are really going to change, the ADU game, I believe, and make it a lot better, because one of them is AB 1033. And so what AB 1033 allows you to do is it allows you to sell off that ADU as a condo. You can condoize it if your local city opts in to that. So they have to opt in and want to participate. Right now, I think San Jose is the only city that officially has a checklist and a process. If you go to their website, they have a full-on checklist of what that process would look like for you to build and then be able to sell off your ADU. So that's going to be huge, especially for underwriting, for appraisals, for evaluations. It just plays a different part in the real estate space.
Lot split or anything like that. It's single parcel.
Right.
I guess
It's not like SB9 where you're doing a lot split and then possibly an ADU. This would be converting, let's say, the garage and then condoizing the ADU. So
and
you
I
would
was going to
have
ask that. Yeah, it can be attached as well as detached.
it would have to be detached. I don't know that you could do a junior, because usually attached is junior ADU.
Okay.
So junior ADUs don't fall under that category just yet. But that's one that we're keeping an eye on, because once other cities start opting in, then it's going to just change up the financing space for ADUs. So it'll allow for people to build. Another one was SB 1211. So that's more for multifamily investors. So if you have let's say 100-unit building, before what we used to have was a 25% density rule. And what that means is you could convert 25% of the existing structure. So, let's say you have a 100-unit building. If you have enough garage spaces or carports or unused space, you could convert 25% of that. But what SB 1211 does is it applies a 25% density rule plus 8 ADUs. So you can have an 8-unit building, right, for example, and add an additional 8 units. You can have a 4-plex and you can add 4 ADUs to it, where before it used to be only 2 or 1, for a 4-unit. So it allows you to scale that strategy a lot quicker, and it makes a lot more sense for, these multifamily investors.
Is it just a unit count now and it's independent of the 25% rule, or?
It is the 25% density rule plus the 8-unit, but existing plus the 8.
Okay.
But the existing structure has to have a minimum of 8 if you're going to add another 8.
Got it.
You can't add 8 ADUs to a 4-plex. It'd have to be 4 units. You could add 4, possibly convert 25% of that. So
and 20 unit, you can add 8. 8's kind of the max.
8, and if we could play around with the 25% density rule, maybe a little bit more. I know one of my friends up in Sacramento, they're actually adding, I think it's 40 ADUs to a 350 unit building, but it's 5 different parcels or 4. So that's how they were able to really maximize. You really have to understand zoning too, so that you can scale it and really try to push for that max density.
Sure.
So yeah, that's on a larger scale, but what I was going to say was I like ADUs because it just helps. It creates a lot of flexibility for homeowners and investors. So you could have a conversation with someone who is a first-time home buyer and wants to tap into this market. They're probably going to look at buying a property with the option of converting space because they're anticipating and they're already relying on that income. Or, they want their in-laws or your family to live in that back unit and have more of a co-living situation. If you're talking to investors, same thing, right? Investors, at least long-term investors. This isn't a play for short-term flip and fix type of investors, right? Because the process of building an ADU is also a lengthy process. And that's what I'm always very transparent with people. The time frame can take somewhere between 8 to 12 months, depending on your local city. But yeah, it caters to different people. People are building it for rental purposes, for elderly family, homeschool, recreational offices, yoga studios, home office, right? It could be a rental right now and it could be a retirement later. Assisted living is another big one because assisted living, I was just talking about this yesterday, is such an expensive type of service, right? For elderly people. And so rather than paying $6,000 to $8,000 in assisted living, you'd be better off leveraging your equity to help you build in your backyard. You live in that backyard and maybe have your kids live in the main home. You downsize to the ADU and now you have a co-living situation. And it'll be a lot less than $6,000, right? A month. Even on that HELOC loan.
And that's incredibly low. It's, assisted living is, from what I've seen, 8 or 9 to 25 grand a month. It's crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
Before you go on, I'm curious. I don't know if you want to talk about the timing now, but you had mentioned the process because I do have clients that'll do, let's just say, a fix and flip on the main house. They won't even they'll work on the permit for the ADU, but they won't mention that in the budget. We won't do the loan based on that. And then they'll finish the ADU. And then once that's done, then they get the ADU permit and then they'll go build that. So what would you say your average for most people, at least in SoCal, what is that timing?
Yeah, I would say for the permits, the planning and permit phase, you're looking at 3 to 6 months, ideally. But, it really depends on who you're working with, places like who you're working with and what city you're working with. So, for example, Long Beach is where I'm from. Born and raised in Long Beach. And Long Beach is one of the cities that's really pioneering ADUs. They've built over 600 ADUs. If you know what you're doing, you can get over-the-counter, OTC, over-the-counter approval for a junior ADU, possibly even an ADU, specifically under, 750 square feet. So, yeah, to your point, on average, it's 3 to 6 months for the permit phase, maybe sooner. It all depends on these, pro-housing local cities that you're working with. So as an investor, I would also look at that, right? Before you even buy an investment property and you're having thoughts of building an ADU or maximizing space, I would consider a city that's very ADU friendly. Mm-hmm. Now, most of them have to be ADU friendly because at this point, it's a statewide law that they have to follow. But, there's still pushback, of course, in some cities, as you know. What was it? Huntington Beach was one of them that tried to give some pushback about a year ago and they ended up losing. SB 9 has had some pushback too. So of course, ADUs aren't going to fit every single neighborhood. I think in some suburban areas, you'll see some type of pushback, which I totally get. But yeah, I would say permit and planning phase, 3 to 6 months. Once you get plans approved, then it would be another 6 to 8 months for construction, whether it's a conversion or, a new construction built. Yeah.
It's good to know. Yeah. Cause that's actually, that's roughly what, depends on the city, obviously, and what you're building, but yeah, that's comparable to just getting a new house permit in a lot of cities.
Right.
So I was, I keep thinking, or I was expecting that the process would be much quicker and maybe post LA fires, there, in certain cities, there might be some more flexibility and speed the process.
Well, hopefully, they are trying to remove a lot of the red tape right now for cities like Pacific Palisades and Altadena, everywhere where, these people are going through these horrible situations of being displaced. They do want to streamline the process. But even though, just like with ADUs, legislation has really done their best in trying to streamline the process. Some of the issues that we still come across is working with the cities, because a lot of these plan checkers don't really stay updated or up to date with these legislations. So sometimes you really have to come at it from a place of understanding and sort of teach them the code and teach them kind of how this new ADU legislation works in the nicest way, right? To really try and get your point across and get your plans approved ultimately.
Yeah. And do you do that? Do you get involved in that, building planning process? And because I would expect it is education sometimes because you.
Of course. Yes. Yeah. Up in SoCal, I'm also a member of the Casita Coalition. So if you want to tap into ADUs and you really want to get involved in advocacy and really understanding legislation, you should join as a member. So we have these monthly calls, and every month that's one of the main topics is how can we get through these either third-party vendors that the city's hiring to try and streamline these submittals. How can we get through to city planning? Up in SoCal, they're going to test out these roundtables where they're going to have people like myself, right, that are ADU consultants teach the plan checkers and people that work for the city more about the strategy and more about the process, and really just referencing the code back to them, which is something that they're not focused on, right? Their day-to-day job is to just really, they actually are trained for liability purposes to almost always say no. So that's the friction that we experience. So although the governor is removing red tape and they want to streamline the process with the cities being able to build after these fires, just think of the influx of submittals, because there's over 19,000 homes that have been burnt, right? So if even a fraction of that starts submitting to the city, just think of the backlog. I don't even think that we're prepared for that. So there's going to be a delay. I also was talking to someone yesterday about the claims, the insurance claims that are going to be paid out in portions, right? So there's a ripple effect, and there's also indirect and direct effects that I think will play in the housing market because of what's happening. Right. And, like I was telling you offline, I think ADUs really help solve a short-term solution for those people and a long-term, because the short-term would be I'm going to be the instructor for the ADU Academy in March in San Diego. And we're also going to be part of the Tiny Fest. And the biggest topic around that is that a lot of these people who have been displaced are either going to have to find temporary housing, possibly sell their land, or possibly, have some sort of short-term housing solution, which could be a tiny home on wheels or an RV type of situation that they could easily park on their property or, on site, really, for now until things are cleared up and cleaned up. And that some of these RVs and some of these tiny homes on wheels can be converted into an ADU later down the line. So that, very cool. These are some of the solutions that I think would really help that side of the equation. Yeah, like I said, I'm all for ADUs because it allows for so much flexibility.
Right. No, it solves a lot of problems, especially
it does.
The no-brainer for the lack of housing, but then now we lump on the fires and how we're going the city's going to deal with that.
Exactly.
So are there any more regulations that you want to cover? Because I have a couple other.
Yeah, there's two other ones. AB 1332, I believe, is the one where any pre-approved plans that we've submitted with the city, let's say I have a set of plans that I've submitted previously with the city of Long Beach and they've been approved, I can use those same set of plans with another project, and that would really help streamline the process. So what it allows for you to do is to repurpose and reuse some of these pre-approved plans that you've had in the past with that specific city. You could also give it a shot, like we had on that call last month. There was someone who had an ADU plan approved in Burbank, and they were wanting to use that same set of plans in San Diego. And I think they had to go through a couple additional steps to get to that point. So you may not be successful using it from one county or one city to another, but you could definitely use it within that city if they opt in. So that's a big one because it helps save costs and time, right? It minimizes corrections.
No, it's huge.
Yeah. And then there's another one. I think I can't remember the number.
Sorry, Steph. Before we leave that one, is in the same city, county, depending on the jurisdiction.
Right.
Is it over the counter basically? If you walk in with, I got approved plans on A, now I need them on B, and boom.
It's almost like over the counter. Yeah. I mean, you still have to go through the different departments, which is annoying. And that's the thing, like in California, we're talking about permits being approved, taking 3 to 6 months. The average in other states is about a month, 3 weeks to a month and a half, right?
Right.
So, and that's because of the way it's set up. We have different departments here. You got to go through building, fire and safety. It just creates a couple more hurdles to have to go through. So, yeah, I mean, it's not quite over the counter, but you're hoping that because you've successfully had this one approved in the past, you minimize corrections and revisions. And all you have to do is just go through the motion and hopefully get it just stamped. Right.
Yeah.
Along the way.
It's funny. Trump was in town, with the mayor and everybody.
Right.
I don't know what, maybe a week and a half ago. And he was harping on that because people were bringing it up. It's like,
right.
Hey, it's a department to department to, it's like, there's no real
it's too many
process or whatever. So I think you were going to mention one other.
Yeah. The other one, I don't remember the numbers because it's hard to remember everything, but it's AB.
We'll do show notes, by the way, everybody.
Okay.
You don't have to remember all these numbers.
Yeah, so this other legislation is AB something 226, I think, talking about unpermitted ADUs. And that's a big one because that's sort of how ADUs really started, is a lot of them were unpermitted and inhabitable. And because of that, people or the state really pushed for ADUs to be feasible and allowed because people were already building them illegally anyway, just not under the proper conditions or up to building standards. So this basically allows for you to convert it properly using the right, process. And each city has like their own checklist of what that would look like. But that's huge. I think it has to be built before 2018. So anything before that, you'd qualify to be able to convert it to a proper ADU and have it permitted with its own address.
I'm curious if it was post 2018, how would you deal with that? I mean, is it like, I've run into issues where I've done stuff without permit and then I get caught and then I've done all this work and then they come in and they're like, well, that, wasn't original. So you got to, or they would say that someone, the prior buyer did something without permits. And then they're like, well, you got to make sure, you got to go get all that permitted now. So I'm just curious on how that works.
Yeah, I don't, to be quite honest, I don't deal with a whole lot of them because the process is not as streamlined or as easy as it should be just yet. This was a legislation that just passed this year. And I think there's still a lot of things that need to happen in order to make that an easy process. Because to your point, I've seen some ADUs that are non-permitted that were done pretty good, right? Almost up to code, you could say. Yeah. But then there's others that it's like, well, who did you hire? Like, you're going to have to tear this thing down and rebuild it, because when you are trying to permit an unpermitted ADU, you still have to go through the motion, right? They still have to verify that utilities were done correctly. They still have to check footings. So if they still have to go through the motion as if it was a new one, it does create every single ADU is different because some of them were built somewhat up to code, some of them were not. And that's the whole issue. So I really don't get involved with permitting unpermitted structures. I would just anticipate that if you open up a can of worms with the city, that's what could happen, right? They could say,
Right.
okay, we'll just go through these set of inspections and you're good to go. Or they could come back and say, you're going to have to tear it down, the
Right.
entire thing, and resubmit. And then
Yep.
you just have to be ready for that to happen. Yeah, either way.
Which is common in unpermitted
And I mean, I
stuff.
honestly think that it's not the end of the world if that was to happen. I think ultimately you want to get it permitted. You want it to have its own official independent address. You want it to be built up to code. It's going to add more value to your property in the long run. And it's just the best way to do it. You don't have to be stressed out about your neighbors calling on you or the city having to go inspect. Just do things the right way. It'll be a good investment in the long run.
No, that's a good point. And that my audience they're on board with that because it's, it takes more time and more work, but you
Right.
also get that on the back end because, the buyer beware ends up affecting price,
Exactly.
So are there any, I'll call them hacks, maybe strategies?
Mm-hmm.
How would you suggest? So my audience, for the most part, investors and developers. And so when they're doing ADUs, I mean, everything is just, on a timeline, right? Trying to do it as quickly as possible versus like a
Right.
homeowner, which it's like, oh, we had a few month delay, no big deal. It affects the bottom line as a developer. How do we get a quicker permit? Do you have any ideas or strategies there?
Yeah. So I would say talking to developers and investors who are looking for hacks, right? And time is of the essence. I would say if you're a developer, I would look at cities that, again, have a very streamlined process. So cities like in LA, you're talking Downey, Long Beach, in Orange County, it could be Costa Mesa, Buena Park, Anaheim, Santa Ana. In San Diego, I mean, you can really maximize it because San Diego has what's called the bonus ADU program. So if you buy a piece of land or a single family home that's in a specific type of zoning type, you can build up to 30 units. You can build unlimited amount of ADUs as long as a percentage of them are also for affordable housing. So I would say look at cities, number one, that are very ADU friendly. And for that, you may want to consult with somebody who's hyper local to your area. You guys can reach out to me and I can analyze what cities those would be. I think at a very basic level, corner lots are always a great option. Avoiding septic tanks or having to need an additional septic because you're going to need one if you build an ADU. Avoiding, if you're going to do a corner lot with a detached garage, don't do new construction because you're going to need solar and that's just an added step and an added cost. What else? I would say, yeah, those are like some hacks, right? Obviously,
Yep.
HOAs they're not allowed to like not let you build, but it's just an added, step of having to get someone else involved. So I would say avoid HOAs, pro housing cities, corner lots. What else? Working with the perfect contractor, which are hard to find right now, as you know, and most of your developers who are listening to the call. So I'd say if you're looking in SoCal, the average price for an ADU is going to be for a garage conversion, probably 120 to 150,000. And I don't like to use a price per square foot, but I would say somewhere between 250 to 350 price per square foot. And there's a lot of things that play a role in your ADU, but I would say those are roughly the prices to anticipate.
How about
prefab
pre-built
models?
ones? Prefab, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, prefab models are good because they do help you cut time. I mean, you still have to go through the permit process, which could probably still take 3 to 6 months. But from the time you get the plans approved, you can build some of these prefab models and some of these structural insulated panels in 2 hours, 3 hours, same day. But you still have to go through the set of inspections. So, it does save you time. I wouldn't say that it does save you money because if you're saving time, you're saving money. But as far as the cost, a lot of people think that prefabs and SIP panels and manufactured homes are less expensive than your traditional stick build. And they're actually not. They're about the same. So
Yeah.
But they're both good strategies, right? It just depends on what the client really wants. So
Right. No, I have a guy that I was anyway, they do prefab. I'm sorry, they do like modules. And same thing. It's like it'll save
same
you a bunch
thing,
of time,
right?
but yeah, it's not necessarily cheaper. I mean, especially for some clients that have all their own, labor and staff. I mean, they're able to build for,
Exactly.
under 250 a foot.
And a lot of them are being imported too. So, you just
Right.
have to add that cost into it too. And you have to make sure you find proper installers. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of things to consider. But overall, a great strategy as long as you vet the right people. I would say that's probably the most important part as a developer or as an investor. If you're wanting to build a long-term relationship with your ADU strategist, you just like you would with your title rep, with your loan officer, with your agent, broker, right? You have this set of people that are part of your team. You want to look at the long-term relationship. So highly vet the people that you're working with.
Absolutely. Okay, let's jump over to that. You had mentioned before we started recording the LA fires and just some of how ADUs are basically being used to obviously create housing, but just for people that need to rebuild. And I don't know, you want to cover some stuff related to that?
Yeah, I was mentioning earlier that people are going to have to unfortunately make one of three choices, which is number one, finding some sort of midterm housing solution. Number two, I talked about possibly selling off their land if they don't have the proper coverage or financing or enough equity to rebuild, right? Because most likely you're going to have to rebuild that same exact home. And I don't know that everyone's going to have the proper payouts from these insurance companies or the funds to do it. And then the last one is like, building an ADU long term. The problem is you can't really build an ADU right now until you build a main home, or at least submit both at the same time. So what I was talking about was a lot of these manufactured homes or tiny homes on wheels. Clever Tiny Homes is one of the vendors that I work with personally. You guys can check them out. And so what Clever Tiny Homes has is they have some models that you could have as a tiny home on wheels as of today, but there's a permitting process to convert that tiny home on wheels into an ADU. So, if you go through that process later down the line, then you can convert it into an ADU. But at least for now, you're able to basically have like an RV or a tiny home on wheels on your driveway or on your land for now, and then eventually convert it. So, yeah, I mean, I think long-term ADUs will be the way to solve this housing crisis for now.
Now that in that case, is it like having a motorhome on your property? There's like no, you don't even need to talk to.
You don't need right, yeah. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so I'll also include that in the show notes. So I guess that was kind of it, Steph. Anything else that you wanted to share?
No, I think we gave people a good overview of the importance of ADUs, why we should keep advocating. I think more people should understand the strategy. And of course, there's more high-level hacks that we could possibly have on a part 2 session, or, if people want to listen to my episode. I've had developers who specialize in ADUs. I've had architects. I've had every single person that's in the space that you could hear from and get different strategies and on what they're doing that's working, because there's multiple strategies within the ADU space.
Well, I've got clients that have been doing, multifamily, primarily fourplexes, zone 1 to 4, SFR lots. And so, they've just been doing those at a pretty high level, super savvy, experienced investors and developers. And with the rates and the compression on rents, at least prior to this major shortage of housing in LA, they've had to add ADUs to make their numbers work. So every one of their, either double duplex or fourplex, they're adding at least one, if not two ADUs to those just to make, just to, hit their numbers, because they're, start looking at your returns, and it's like, you see the rates go up and your cost of financing and stuff go up, and in some cases rents going down. I mean, you got to do something. So it's a creative way to, to increase the profitability of a project, not to mention for, just even either a new or rehab SFR. I mean, adding an ADU. I mean, especially with some of these new, regulations. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer. I appreciate the time. And so it's, check out Steph Sells ADUs, guys.
Thank you.
I will have detailed show notes both on YouTube channel and the website where all of these are located, as well as just, whatever your podcast provider of choice.
Yeah, and I'm excited to have you on mine as well. So stay tuned for that, guys.
Let's do it. Absolutely. Yeah. Do you want to share where can they find your podcast? Is it what's
if you go to stuffsellsadu.com, you'll see the Spotify and the YouTube, and I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, and Spotify. Those would be
excellent.
The 4. Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks again for the time, Steph.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.